So let me ask you this: speaking of the financial dimension, you one of the people actually who argues that financial markets ultimately discipline governments. So is Europe increasingly governed through debt markets rather than democratic politics? Has sovereign debt, in other words, become the mechanism through which national sovereignty is quietly transferred elsewhere?
Yeah, so when I think of power and when I look through these empires, from Dutch, British to American, you'll notice the dominant force, the dominant power in a capitalist economy. And this is not the traditional definition of capitalism, because capitalism would require a free market where capital competes. When you have a central bank that determines the price of capital, then you don't have capitalism. And when you have a government that can assume the debt, what you end up with is socialism for the wealthy because they get bailed out, socialize the losses and privatize the gains, and capitalism for the poor. They have to compete, but they can't compete because they get the highest interest rate. If you think of you're at the bottom of the chain, and you're on payday loans and credit cards to survive, you're paying the highest interest rate. Whereas if you're a bank, you're actually creating money every time you issue a loan. So you actually get free money. And so if you go along that spectrum, you got companies, the larger the company, like say Apple, they can borrow on the debt capital markets at a cheaper rate. A country, and then a country like America, if you want to borrow for a month, then you pay a lower interest rate. If you want to borrow for 30 years, then you're paying a higher interest rate. So, you know, but when that is determined via a central bank, then you no longer have capitalism. And so we have this distorted reality. But in effect, individuals are controlled by their access to capital and the interest on their debt, which is what determines whether they can use that debt in order to invest in assets. And then those assets outperform the money printing and the inflation. And if you get that wrong, if you use your debt in order to consume and purchase goods, then you just end up getting poorer and poorer and poorer as the rich get richer and richer and richer. And then all the assets at the end of the cycle where we are in America right now, you have like 92% of stock market value, which are held by 10% of institutions and wealthy individuals. And so capital is what determines, and you can look at that. That's at the individual level, it's mortgages, credit cards, everything. Then you look at the corporate level, your ability to go public, sell your shares, gives you access to debt capital markets. And so debt is a subordination vehicle. And then at the sovereign country level, the bondholders dictate, the bond vigilantes, they have the ability to destroy your currency, to force you to print currency in order to pay a debt priced in another
Right.
currency. Or they can basically lobby in order to buy the politicians. And so when financial power, and one thing that happens in investment banking, and I used to work in investment banking, is you turn all the businesses into products, you load them up with debt, you get voting rights, and then you install your own board, and then the executives now work for you. And so they work for your bonds, your equity voting rights, and your board that you install. And so then, as this happens, as you take more and more companies public, you subordinate more and more companies where their net worth is dependent upon you giving access to capital and defending their share price. So this complex, as it were, this financial industrial complex, I call it, which consists of asset managers, investment banks, private equity, Silicon Valley, banks that create fiat currency. They act as a complex, and in my estimation, most governments, in the extreme case, you take all Europe, Canada, Australia, US, UK, Canada, they're all subordinate to transnational capital and the financial industrial complex. Then you've got on the other extreme, the Chinese Communist Party in China, where capital is now allowed to control the government. And so all companies are subordinate to the government. and you get more authoritarian type of structure. And then you have a hybrid where a country like Saudi, let's say, and even Iran in this case, they keep their resources. They take those resources and they put it in a sovereign wealth fund, and then they can partner with this financial industrial complex to co-invest, and that buys them influence to try and keep out the FIC and the Jekylls. I'll call it FIC, financial industrial complex, from their country. And those are the battles. One sovereign country, which is China, a bunch of countries which have sovereign wealth funds, which had to co-invest and co-op FIC in order to keep the Jekylls out from regime changing them and taking them over. And then countries which have neoliberal, globalized financial capital markets, which are fully subordinate to the financial industrial complex, and the governments work for them. Every politician has to go up a ladder of securing capital from the lobby, providing value to the lobby, and then eventually being in a compromise network like Jeffrey Epstein, if you want to go all the way to the top, like Trump.